She's just come back a bit. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone that's joined us for our LinkedIn Live. I just can't believe how quick these come around. It's so quick. And today we've got a really important topic. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity within global payroll and why it's paramount to be on top of it. So today we have Rick as normal. So Rick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So Rick Hamill, founder and CEO of Helios and also Atlas as well. I'm very much focused on streamlining how companies onboard, manage, and pay their employees around the world and how they do it effectively and compliantly. And so super excited to have our team and thank you, Melanie, for having us on here to talk about one of the most important things, cybersecurity.
And Andrew, over to you. Would you like to introduce? We have spoken before, so I'm excited to have you on because we're going to have like a bit of a geek fest, I reckon, on cybersecurity. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
That's what I'm good for. Yeah, it's great to be back. Thanks, Melanie. So CTO of Helios, Andrew Constantine. So just like Rick, we're focused on solving some of the challenges that companies have around the world with global payroll and supporting their employees and their people around the world. Obviously, today's focus is on cybersecurity, and I think it's a hot topic for most companies around the world today, and probably different levels of maturity, different approaches that different companies are taking. I know there's a lot of a lot of questions and doubts in people's minds around this, and not least of which with what's happening in the AI space and the changes in technology that are happening at almost a daily basis at the moment. So really looking forward to the conversation.
And Rick, we're getting a bit of feedback again from your fan, your overworked fan. So thank you. When you're not on, if you could mute, that'd be fab. Thank you.
Absolutely. And then Melanie, if I could take 2 seconds just to give some really quick update news. So Helios is officially launching in November. So we're super excited about what we're doing, really focusing on streamlining how companies operate and manage their teams in 127 countries. Andrew and his amazing team has been able to build this platform focusing on powering it by AI and automation. 99.9% automation is our focus. And so love to talk to you guys a little bit more about what we're doing. You can find us on LinkedIn and on our website at helios.io. But we are officially launching. And I will say one thing that we're excited about is doing it cost effectively. So starting pricing at $99 a user per employee per month. And that's for all of our services for our HCM, global payroll, EOR, contractor pay, everything started at $99 a month all together as one single price. So love to talk to you guys a little bit about that if anyone has any interest. Thank you.
That's great news. And it's come around. It's come around so quickly, and it's great to see here. So just before we start, I'd just love to know where our audience is from. So I know we have our regular people that attend this on a monthly basis. So please feel free to say hi and let us know what part of the world you're joining us. So I suppose we'd better start on this really important topic. Oh, actually, also, if you have any questions, put them in the comment box as well. So cybersecurity. I would say the last 2 or 3 years has really become a hot topic. And I was doing a bit of research, and cybercrime is expected to increase by 15% year on year. And I'm sure there's other statistics, but still 15% is a huge increase. And within the UK, 50% of businesses have had some type of cybercrime hit. And, that's anything from medium-sized businesses up to large businesses. And apparently the companies in the UK, so if you are based in the UK, your organisation is more likely to be hit than in other locations. So obviously, cybercrime does happen globally, but for some reason right now, UK companies are on the hit list. So they're pretty big sort of figures, aren't they, really, Andrew? Are you surprised by those?
No, not really surprised. I mean, it's definitely growing, and it's a concern and challenge across, I think, every single company that's operating with anything to do with technology. And it's not just impacting the high tech companies who are developing kind of based on modern technology stacks and cloud-based architecture and modern security practices. It's also impacting companies that have been around for a long time, and probably more so to some degree because a lot of companies that have been around for a period of time are typically running on legacy platforms. So they may be working with multiple third-party platforms, which were all developed before this was a thing, right? And so as the world becomes more online, as we become more digital, as things become more accessible, it also obviously opens up risk and challenges across all companies. I mean, the key thing that most companies are obviously focused on is looking at where those threats are coming from, and they come from the cyberspace. Typically, very bad actors that are out there in the world who are looking to attack any company, right? And it's not just the big guys that are being attacked. It's every single company that has an online presence or a doorway into the online world who's potentially at risk. And probably to an extent, smaller companies are actually more at risk because they won't necessarily have the same kind of robust practices and technology and processes in place. So I think obviously we'll be talking about it today, but really for all companies, technology is one part of it. Really, practice, process, education is probably the largest part of it. It's if you look at some of the stats out there, along with the cyber attacks growing, and whether that's ransomware or a breach, the majority of breaches that happen are actually caused by human error when you kind of take it into account and of all potential routes into a company. And that human error generally isn't because somebody's done something deliberately wrong. It's generally because of policies, processes, and potentially tech setups as well. So it is a growing issue, and it's something that all employees should have top of mind, because the first line of defense of any company is its employees, and that's everybody who works in factories and warehouses, to people around in the field, to people who are manning telephones, operational call centers, all the way through to IT and technology. So it's a significant concern, and we probably can't overstate the risk and the issues that are out there today.
So my insurance company, I was going to say they're loving this, but I shouldn't say that. Maybe they're rubbing their hands a little bit. But the broker that I deal with, I've been working with her for 10, 15 years. And she just said, Mel, we don't hear about break-ins anymore. We don't hear about offices broken into. She said the thing that we are dealing with more and more now is cybersecurity and that sort of fraud. So she said, when we first started speaking, it's a totally different business now. So I think you're right there. They deal with small, medium and large organisations. And she was saying that it is being hit across the board.
And Melanie, one thing I'll add to that as well is that as you kind of look about training, I think Andrew mentioned this as well, making sure that you're having proactive training. People are a lot more sophisticated these days in how they're actually getting into these businesses. Simple emails. They can easily find out the name of your CEO on LinkedIn. And so they can mimic an email address that looks like that. And sometimes we don't look at the exact email addresses. We just see the name and assume that I'm going to respond or click on whatever that is. There are certain trainings that can go in companies can use specifically for payroll and HR that can actually help people understand and identify those type of emails so they can proactively do that. Some things as well, like some of the things that we do here at Helios, is we do proactive fake emails that we test and see, are people clicking that, what that click rate looks like, and how we can train the individuals who may or may not fail that. And then I have to say, our recent one we just did, we actually had no clicks, which was great. But it's because we are constantly doing that type of training to ensure that our teams understand how to identify emails, how to identify something that may be a false individual. Those are things that many organizations can do and put those things in place to make sure they're setting their organizations up for success. Another thing I think is important is within your culture. Andrew hit on it earlier, which was no one's really maliciously doing these things. And so you don't want to have a punitive kind of response if something happens like that. Things happen, people make mistakes. How do you make sure that you are training and giving your team the tools to be able to set yourself up for success? When you look at the attacks that typically happen, it's going to typically be in finance, payroll, and HR, because that's where the most sensitive information is going to be. So businesses need to focus on how to make sure you're leveraging and giving the tools for success for your teams. And
are we just losing? Oh, we just lost you a little bit then, Rick.
oh, sorry about that.
That's all right. It's technology. So I'll go on to my next question. I just want to say it's great to see so many people from around the world, and I'm sure the guys that join us from the Philippines, I feel like it's pretty late for you guys. So thank you for staying up, and good luck, Emma, in your new position. So I hope you find today's session really helpful. So obviously we're here to talk about global payroll. What are the unique cybersecurity challenges faced by global payroll systems compared to other business functions? So Rick's just said payroll, finance, and HR. We hold the key data. Yeah, what do you think are the unique challenges, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, it does largely revolve around what Rick was saying, right? It's that kind of sensitive data that lives in this world, and whether that's information on payroll itself, all the way through to personal information, so PI data. There may be social security numbers, it may be pension details, it could be dependency details, it could be kind of government benefit details, whatever it is. There's extremely sensitive data that's being held in platforms related to payroll. And I mean, kind of the security around that's really important, and we'll talk about that in terms of kind of different approaches around both people as well as tech. I think the wider issues as well that kind of tie into that as well is obviously there's compliance side of things. So different countries have different protection laws and different regulations that revolve around data and the treatment of payroll. It's hard to keep track of these, especially if you're operating across multiple jurisdictions. These things change all the time; they're continuously updated, and you could be, from a technology perspective, you could be working with multiple platforms in different jurisdictions, in different countries, even different regions within a country. If you look at something like the US, it's very hard to keep technology, with multiple platforms up to date with compliance and the regulations around that. You've also got things like cross-border data transfers. We talk a bit about GDPR and HIPAA and other regulations around data. When you've got data moving across boundaries, and especially geographical boundaries, where there's regulations involved, as well as the security side of things, it can be difficult to manage it, right? And so you've got to be working with the right partner to be able to manage that effectively. And then just the kind of nuts and bolts of technology. Typically, like I said before, most companies that have been around for a period of time will be relying on different pieces of technology that maybe they've built up internally, maybe they've taken from a third party, they've kind of built a spec through a project. They're often cobbled together through kind of multiple integration projects, and it tends to leave gaps, right? There's holes unless you have a really secure by design type approach into the methodology, and your partners have the same approach as well. You can leave gaps and holes in there. So that integration side of things, it's almost can be, for large organizations and especially multinational international organizations, it can be almost like whack-a-mole in terms of kind of keeping a lid on the different platforms and the integrations and third parties and data flows. So it is difficult. However, despite it being difficult, it's one of those things that just can't be ignored. So I think the challenges are there, but they are solvable, and with the right approach and the right focus from leadership teams across the board. This isn't just an IT issue; it's not just technology. This needs to be part and parcel of how the senior leadership team thinks about investment in technology and safeguarding data of their employees, especially. It just needs to be kind of a fundamental component of how people think about their investment and their roadmap and how they approach things.
Do you feel like to me it feels like it's the issue comes with the third party providers? Do you think that's sort of where it happens more so?
It can do, but again, it depends on how robust your vendor compliance and your vendor management side of things is. So every company that's working with different partners should have really robust processes in place where if you're evaluating new vendors, obviously they would need to go through that. If you've got existing vendors, you should put them through those audits and you should put them through those controls, and because it is evolving all the time. So the kind of questions or audits or reviews that were done on a partner that may have been integrated 10 years ago are going to be very different today. So that annual checkup, it's almost like a health check on the entire estate, is really, really important. And most companies, if they're a professional company, are prepared for this. And some will do it just by rote. They will do it as part of their service and their offering. Some will wait to be asked, but most companies are kind of ready to do that because they'll be doing this themselves as well. So though you obviously have less control and you have less, I guess, kind of arms around management of third parties and partners, you can certainly put the processes in place to make sure that you shore it up. And I've previously worked for large multinationals with 45,000 people around the world, and you can imagine the amount of technology systems and different vendors and partners are involved in that around the world. But every single vendor, regardless of if it was a consulting group with 5 people in it, through to working with an SAP or a Microsoft or an IBM, would basically be put under the same kind of rigor in terms of review around their own policies and practices.
Yeah.
Melanie, I'll add to that, where I think it's really important when you're working with payroll providers to ask them what their processes are. Having an ISO certification or a SOC 2 certification, that's really important because that says they're building a strong foundation for process improvement, process procedures, and involvement from that. Going through a vendor tier process is key. And so working with those partners when you're choosing your payroll provider, ask them what they're doing, how they safeguard, what process and procedures they have in place, how are they vetting their vendors if they're using third parties from that perspective. Because to your point, absolutely, those breaches tend to happen locally, and then they can true up into a third party from there. So ask them what they're doing to safeguard and go through a risk assessment when you're going through your RFP process.
So one of the things, I think there was quite a big data breach a few years back. And we had one of our events and we asked, does everyone have a contingency plan put in place? And there wasn't. And then we asked last week, and that, when we asked the same question, there was a lot more people. I think, majority of the people had got a contingency plan put in place. But because they're becoming more frequent, what critical steps do payroll leaders need to take to protect sensitive employee information, especially during, around multiple jurisdictions?
Yeah.
Go.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'll jump in first. I would add on to what we've just been saying, right? I think all of those are valid, kind of as a response. The additional things that admins and leaders in this space need to be looking at is it's kind of the practical approach to things, right? Because you can talk about implementing robust security measures like encryption and firewalls and secure networks and secure by design in terms of development and integration. A lot of that's taken care of by the technology team, right? So that happens in development in the IT teams. However, the communication with those teams is paramount. So because we're all in the same boat, we're all facing the same challenges. If there's a risk there, we're all facing it. So I think really clear communication lines between technology and IT and the payroll organization and the HR organization and finance means that everybody's on the same page in terms of the security measures that are there that go beyond just the kind of bits and bytes of developing technology in this space. And then, from a policy and procedure perspective, just the really, again, the pragmatic side of things, limiting the amount of data to only what's needed on every single employee or kind of associate within the company. So just having what's required there and nothing else. And making sure that access is really tightly controlled. So only the people who should have access to that information have access to it, right? And again, I think we'll get into it, but there's, in the real world, when things become hard, people find ways around corners, right? And they look for shortcuts to get through things that may be a poor experience, or it's difficult, or it's hard to understand. It's really important that that's managed properly, right? So that you think about the experience from a security perspective in terms of user interaction and kind of stepping through encryption and security and all the rest as well. And then just training, because I think that regular training means that it's making it very clear in people's kind of employees and team members' minds where the risks are, what can happen, And a lot of it is just very simple real life stuff that's happening. Somebody gets an email and a phishing attempt, or there's a phone call into the business, which sounds legitimate, but they're potentially looking for information or access to people that they shouldn't be. It's kind of sharing of data amongst colleagues. It's good password management, and none of that is really high tech. That's kind of really simple. Everybody can understand that and get behind it. And I think it's just kind of taking some of the mystique away, because cyber, as soon as you say cyber attacks, cybersecurity, it sounds hard and it sounds big and it sounds really challenging. The reality is most breaches are happening through very simple missteps, or kind of simple things that can just be very could have been solved and nipped in the bud very quickly and very early on. So I think that continuous communication across the organization, continuous training of people, of what the threats are, how to respond to them, that it's an open environment. To Rick's point, it's not punitive. Mistakes happen. We're here to try and avoid them happening, obviously. But the last thing that we should do is try and hide, or be be afraid of kind of consequences of something going wrong. So, and I think when you get all of that right, I mean, the response that we've seen is when you get all these factors in place properly, is people respond really well to it, because kind of the response from a people perspective is you're the protector of the company, and there's value in that, and you want to protect your colleagues and your team and your the people that are working with you. And when it becomes part of it's almost like a defensive mechanism, and making sure that you've got that shored up as part of your culture, and it means that everybody is kind of bought into the fact of we're going to beat the bad guys, right, by doing things properly and sticking to policy and process and education and all the rest.
Yeah. Did you have something to add to that, Rick?
Yeah, Melanie, I agree with everything Andrew just said. I also say, it's important that you also test your processes. So don't just say you have a policy in place, test it. I think that's going to be really important. Run scenarios, see how your business will react. And then also leverage your staff as well as your champions as well. As they tell you what's going on, what they're noticing, adjust your policies and procedures. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we've seen with risk management or payroll or HR is they say, we've got a policy, and they don't review it or they don't test it. So making sure that they take the steps to try and true it and make sure it's a good policy, make sure it actually works, run the scenario that you had a breach. How does your business react to that, so that you can adjust accordingly or train accordingly if you see some gaps? I think that's going to be really important as well.
So a few years ago, we ran our first summit, and our keynote speaker was talking about putting data in the cloud. And I remember a couple of people coming up to me really angry that they felt like I'd wasted their time talking about putting data in the cloud because it was such a new concept, it was never going to happen. So obviously, our business is fully in the cloud, and more companies are moving to the cloud, especially since COVID. But does this allow more risks for the payroll department by moving to the cloud?
I don't think so. I think it changes the kind of paradigm in terms of approach, but I think to the positive, really, because the reality is with the cloud providers, there's a shared responsibility with as you as their client and as a cloud provider, and they put a lot of investment into making sure that their environments are secure, their services are secure. They have multi-levels of authentication and defensive walls before you get into platforms. So kind of I keep mentioning secure by design. Cloud is secure by design for sure. So the likes of AWS and Google and Microsoft invest a lot of money in getting this right. I mean, there's always cases where it can go wrong. I mean, there was a recent outage with Azure with Microsoft that's is a notable one, and that was actually centered on one of their threat detection systems that took it down. But it wasn't actually a cyber attack. It was actually just a piece of software that went down. But that's one side. There is a shared responsibility with the cloud providers, and that's where you're investing in when you put your platforms into the cloud. I think having gone through in my career multiple cloud transformations of taking large companies from very non-cloud environments into the cloud and taking them through digital transformation, there in no case was there ever a thought that we would go backwards from that. Right? It was done for the right reasons. It's exactly the right thing to do, not just from a cost and scalability and capability perspective, but really from a security perspective as well, because that shared responsibility is effectively divesting the security across both yourself as well as the cloud provider, and we should be able to trust the likes of Amazon and Microsoft and Google with our data, right? That's kind of what those companies are built on. So, I'm obviously a cloud convert and come from the technology space. I'd say there's very few that aren't these days, but for me, it changes the approach, but in positive ways rather than negative.
I would love to know who that person was, or the two people, because I can't remember now because I'm getting old, just to see if they're now in the cloud. But, technology changes, doesn't it? So one of the things actually talking about technology changing is there's obviously a lot of discussion about AI. And Andrew, we run a session on AI and the future. And one of the questions I have, which people haven't answered, is how is AI going to help with cybersecurity? What sort of effects or positive or down, are there positives, are there downsides? How is AI actually going to work for cybersecurity?
So I think with all things AI, there's two sides to it, right? There's the risk side of it, and then there's the defensive or the positive side of it. It's very clear that AI is changing the game in terms of the threat risk and the heightening of that risk as well. Cyber attacks are definitely getting more sophisticated. AI and machine learning are used by pretty smart cyber criminals to look for breaches and defenses and to attack and to do it at a scale and volume that's very hard for companies to be able to defend against, because often it's kind of almost like a tsunami of attack that's coming away, and it could be on multiple levels, and AI effectively enables all of that because it scales up the possibilities of what could have been done previously. So at the same time as well, AI is fairly new. I mean, AI has been around for a long time, but all the recent stuff around generative AI and large language models and all the stuff we were talking about on the last call, Melanie, is relatively new. And so, like with any new technology, it's constantly maturing and evolving. Again, in comparison to all technologies that have come before it at an extremely rapid rate and a rapid pace. But there's a lot of investment going into developing things like large language models, where you've got huge data sets that are stored out in the cloud and are accessible by people. You've got people building tools on top of those LLMs, and so as that technology evolves, it potentially becomes a risk point as well, because especially from a data perspective, the large language models that the big tech giants have built have not necessarily built them for you and I. They've built them for themselves, and have to be very careful about the data that goes in there. So, and then there's obviously with that comes privacy concerns and security concerns around that. So that's kind of, I suppose, the glass half empty view of the world. The glass half full view of the world, or the kind of positive side of things, is that AI is actually speeding up the defensive side of things. So, things like threat detection, being able to kind of, I mentioned before, multi-pronged attacks as a massive wave kind of becoming the norm. And it's very hard for, people sitting within a security center to be able to meet those and kind of deal with them on a human level. But AI is actually making it possible to start looking at things like threat detection, fraud detection as well. So picking up patterns in data that are coming through, looking at changes, and this would be really important with payroll as well. If there's significant changes in payroll that kind of come through but not being flagged up or spotted, AI will help with that, right? In terms of being able to look at kind of changes in data and flag that up for somebody to take a look at or to respond to. And then also the other point that kind of AI is bringing in is things like data encryption and hardening systems and platforms. And again, all the positives that come with that is it's effectively scaling up to, kind of in a very simple language, kind of, billions of points, as opposed to human level. We've been able to get through these 32 action points on a list in an Excel document. It's that kind of level of change. So it's definitely evolving. The risks will get more and more with AI, but then AI will also be there to meet those risks as well. So it's kind of a balancing act at the moment.
So we had a question from Christian. So hopefully that's answered your question, because that came in at the same time as mine. So we're obviously thinking on the same wavelength. Because you mentioned encryption. So in layman's terms, does encryption is that actually no? Can you explain what encryption is? Because I was going to ask you, and I would most probably get that wrong.
I mean, encryption's been around for a long time, right? So encryption is effectively a cryptology approach to securing data. It's been around since World War II, and kind of people have been puzzling this for a long time. Encryption is basically masking data and using a key to do it. And there's different ways of encrypting data. It could be data at rest, which is data that's stored within a cloud system or a platform, or it's data in transit, which is when you've got data going from point A to point B, right? And that could be through multiple mechanisms. It could be over borders. It could be through different cloud systems. But the encryption side of things is effectively kind of putting a token on that data, so it's masking that data, and only the person who has the key or the token can decrypt it. It's also possible, and again, it's kind of getting into kind of low-level technical detail. It's also possible to get it wrong as well. So one of the things that one of the mistakes companies can make is by not having a smart encryption approach or framework with their data, where it gets to the point that it's so difficult to decrypt it that people go around the corners. That's what I was mentioning before, where if you can find a short circuit around things, it's just human nature that will do that, right? So if it's become too difficult to be able to decrypt data that's coming through, even engineers will find ways to short circuit that and to get that data into a platform because they're under pressure from a development perspective or a project perspective. So kind of the short answer is, encryption is really just about protecting data. How companies go about encrypting their data is really important. And the main thing is when you're working with a partner it's one of the key questions to ask if it's in an RFI or whether it's in a vendor analysis, is their approach into encryption and making sure that it's, kind of something that's publicly available, is known, is secure, is not kind of custom and bespoke. It's used by other providers. All the key things you kind of look for when you do your vendor evaluation. And it's really, from a payroll perspective, from an administrator, from a HR perspective, it's basically giving you the surety that any data that we transmit throughout our platform, that sits within our platform, that interacts with partner platforms, that goes up to the cloud, is 100% protected and can't be cracked because we have that encryption in place.
Rick, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think I agree with everything Andrew just said as well. I think it's really important as you go through that process, ask your vendors of that. So we talk about this a lot, Melanie, when it comes to vendor selection for global payroll or other solutions regarding global teams. That's exactly what you have to ask. You need to make sure you're asking how to make sure you have a secure partner. How do you minimize breach or risk like that? Ask this during your RFP process. It's really very simple to get that information. And if vendors don't have it, then that should be a red flag to you as well. There should be ways that they are protecting your data and thinking about it, not just on a biannual basis. They should be thinking about it every single day and should be evolving that every single day. And I think that I'm smiling here on LinkedIn Live because I'm just proud of what Andrew is saying, because that is our methodology here at Helios, is making sure that we do it the right way up front.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me when we ran a symposium in Sydney was we talked about cybersecurity, and one of our presenters was being very honest about post-it notes and passwords. Just make sure that stuff isn't hanging around that's easy for people to share. So we've spoken about education. So education really seems to be the key thing for your employees to understand how they could fall victim of it, because as we all know, payroll, HR, finance, everyone's busy, everyone is under pressure, deadlines, but training seems to be the biggest thing. But also, we always talk about having a relationship with HR, finance. Is it now important for payroll leaders to start really building their relationships with the IT department?
I think that's so important. Again, Andrew indicated earlier that you're one team, right? And you're only there to support each other from that perspective. Finance, HR, they should be leveraging tech and the IT departments as their bodyguards, right? What they should be having transparent conversations. They should talk about what are the issues they're having in their organization, and IT can help with solutions to actually minimize those risks for them. So absolutely, we talk about payroll being at the table, we talk about HR being at the table, IT absolutely needs to be at the table. Dev product needs to be at the table and looking at solutions like that to solve these major problems that businesses are having today with tech.
I will say, Andrew, your eyes like lit up when I said that.
Well, they do. I mean, I've spent years where that wasn't the case, right? So kind of and again, depending on the company, kind of technology companies or services companies or financial services companies. And the positive thing is, I think it's changing, right? Kind of the us and them world that maybe existed before, where there's probably two ways. The techies were fairly snooty about all their technical knowledge, not necessarily supportive. And then on the other hand, kind of people who weren't in technology, kind of feeling a little bit like a black box and kind of no understanding what was going on. I think those days have changed, right? I think all companies are getting to the stage now where we don't have those silos within organizations because, and again, it's kind of putting a serious slant on it. The threat is very real, and that threat is significant, and it really can't be discounted. I mean, fortunately, I've always worked for companies where we've implemented very good security, and I've not been on the receiving end of the kind of incidents that we're talking about, but I've certainly been involved with partners who have, and I can tell you when it happens, it is not an experience that anybody would like to have ever again. It'd be once in a lifetime experience that anybody would have, because it is bad, right? We can't. There's no kind of softening the blow on this one. It is a terrible experience to go through. And again, just putting all the processes and the education and the right approaches in place will stop it from happening. So this isn't inevitable. It's really important that you work with the right partner or the right platform and have the right internal processes in place, and it won't happen, right? If you have that right, it won't happen. And the main thing is everybody that should be joining hands across the organisation and making sure that that's the case.
And to be honest with you, I know somebody who owned a company, a very large organisation, and unfortunately they got hit a few years back, and they were very honest and just said you wouldn't wish this on your worst enemy. And to be fair, they looked like they'd aged, overnight for 10, 15 years. They look really good now, but at that time you could just see the stress, and I will confirm they were just like, you would never want to go through this at all. So, but the thing is, I think what we're trying to do from the GPA really is to say, look, get prepared for not if, but when. So, Andrew, when you did say you hadn't experienced it, I was touching wood for you. So, what would your advice be if a payroll department is hit by a cyber attack? Obviously, this is a huge topic, but is there any sort of like high level suggestions that you would provide?
I mean, I think and again, having been on the other side of the table as it's happened to colleagues and friends in other companies and also partners that I've worked with, when it has happened, the companies that have got through it have been the ones that have got through it kind of the best way possible. Have been those that have been prepared. So, Melanie, to your point around, you asked the question, back in the day around who's prepared for this or what would you do, and there wasn't an answer. The companies that have thought about that now and have that plan in place are going to be the ones that kind of pull through in a way that kind of gets you to the back end of it, kind of successfully. The other thing is, as well as kind of having that plan in place, will mean that you'll approach in a way where panic won't set in. There'll be a process. You'll have the right people involved who know how to respond and react. There may be partners involved on the threat side of things, because obviously, depending on the size of the company, there's companies that specialize in responses to these kind of situations. And once you put that plan in place, I mean, by not panicking means that the companies will be able to contain if it's a breach, for example, you'd contain that breach quickly. You'd be able to respond to it quickly in terms of shutting the right things down. And then I think the only other thing I'd say to that, because all of that kind of makes practical sense. I mean, the thing that really makes the difference is transparency across what's happening, and that's both internal as well as external. So, I mean, there may be a regulatory requirement to kind of inform partners if you're working with partners in this case, and transparency is always the best policy. always, and it's the same internally as well, because it means that, if you're prepared properly, it doesn't have to be panic stations, and people will know how to approach the situation. So it's almost like a fire drill, kind of, and preparing as you would for a fire drill. It's almost that kind of approach. And again, like I said, I've been on the other side of the table and working with a very robust cybersecurity team out of the US, for example, and those are the kind of people that will be coming at you if it happens. So it's really important to make sure that you're well prepared, have everything documented, act in a kind of professional manner, and be very transparent with everybody that's involved, both internally and external partners as well.
And not that I want. Oh, sorry, Rick, on.
So, Melanie, I was just going to say transparency. I agree with that. I think it's important from a payroll and HR perspective when partnering with your vendors, understand what their steps are going to be. If it's 10 steps, what are those 10 steps? So that when you don't create panic. I think we've seen a lot of times when, there was a payroll provider last year, a global payroll provider who had a breach, and they were held up, and it created panic within their clientele. And partly because they didn't know what that was going to look like. What were their 10 steps going to be to resolve this? And so it's being very important when you go through your SLA or your risk assessment with that provider, ask them how they're going to resolve this. And then if something happens or when something happens, you already understand what that looks like, and you can build your policies or your process based on what they're going to do and how you're going to react internally as well. So that transparency is really important when we're working with vendors, and then leveraging that to actually implement that within your own process and procedures within your organization.
And I think that's one of the things that we found from our membership and from the payroll crowd, is that when this has happened, the communication within the industry is, how do we communicate this to our employees? Like, what do we communicate? So I think it's even, working with, if you're a large organization, your press, marketing, find out, what communication do we provide. One of the things that I will say that we found is that sometimes the communication from the vendor had changed over a few weeks, or if not months. So that's always something to keep in mind, that communication is sent out and it potentially can change whilst the investigation is being carried out. But also the other side of things is that it's not the vendor that gets sued; it will be the employer that can get sued by the employee. So I think you really do need to get your in-house sorted and contingency plan sorted. And as Andrew said, do it as a fire drill. I love that. I'm going to use that for future. Christian has said, are there any trainings for cybersecurity for payroll and data handling? I've just put a link in the comments. We wrote a toolkit a few months back. So if you go into the white papers, you'll see another white paper from Helios. But if you scroll down, you'll see our cybersecurity toolkit. It's pretty intense, I would say, but it's got some really good checklists that you can look through for your own department. So we're sort of coming to a natural end. If you have any more questions, thank you, Christian, for getting so involved and asking questions. But what does it look like? Guys, what does the future look like? I feel like we're heading towards maybe more cybersecurity attacks. I don't necessarily want to say the word attacks, but okay, let's use the word attacks. We've got AI getting involved. That will open up more vulnerability, but then again, AI will also help with stopping the vulnerability. We have new things coming in like earned wage access. We have AI generally coming in sort of the future. So what do you think is going to happen, Andrew? What did your prediction look like? I was quite excited about your prediction for AI. So what do you reckon now on cybersecurity?
I think, all those things, Melanie, it is going to get harder for sure. This isn't going away, and it's going to increase over time. Again, I always look at the positive side of technology, and especially with AI as well. That the flip side of that is our ability to be able to protect our people and our people's data, and our platforms is just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. I think there's, kind of looking across the board in terms of how companies operate and how leaders operate within companies. I think cyber before was a cost center, which it clearly is, but it was viewed as a cost center and almost a kind of necessary evil, to a degree in terms of investment and budget put towards it. I think that that mindset is starting to shift in terms of where the threats are, and what it means from having the right robust processes and technology in place, because that's going to be a key part of the investment going forward for any CIO, any CEO, and any CFO going forward of any size company, because this isn't, like I said before, this isn't just the big companies that are getting hit. It's a risk to all companies. So, but again, I say that as a positive thing. People will start thinking about, like I said, secure by design in terms of how they build stuff, in terms of how they operate with the people. I also think the kind of the democratization of this, where it's kind of moved out of the pure tech world of, it's very hard to understand that sometimes in terms of what's being talked about. If we, talked about kind of DOS attacks and all the rest, it's kind of democratizing in a way that everybody can understand, where you understand where the entry points are into the company, and together collectively as a culture, it's becoming part of our corporate culture and our company culture to have the right defensive mechanism set up and the right approach into making sure that, this is really important. It's really important to the health of our company. It's really important to each other. It's really important to you and I as we're employees, and as we're kind of growing this company. So I think that's all positive, right? And I think it's always, technology is always going to change, and we're seeing the seismic shifts in terms of the growth rate, in terms of changes to technology. Fortunately, most of the companies that are working in this space have a degree of ethics and kind of a culture of doing good when they're building the AI. I think that's really important, and with that comes security and protecting companies that are working with it. So long may that continue. And so I see kind of the future's bright. It could feel kind of scary, and it could feel a bit daunting in terms of the way things are changing, but at the same time, I think we've got the right things in place, right, to make sure that companies are just getting more secure and more safe around this.
Rick, have you got anything you want to add?
Yeah, you asked what the future looks like. I think that it's going to be evolving. I think that as technology evolves, as how businesses operate globally, how they evolve, that you're going to see more of that sophistication come into the approach. So being proactive it's really important. Trying to figure out how organizations, or how to protect yourselves, how to make sure that you're training your staff. I think that's going to be important, but it's just going to get more sophisticated. I think that we've seen that. So the point earlier that you made, that someone said, there's no way we're going to go in the cloud. You wasted my time. A few years later, look what happened. We're very much in the cloud, and there was obviously events that expedited that within our cultures, but still, it's still there, and people are trying to figure out how to leverage. There are great people in the world and there are bad people in the world, and you have to protect yourselves from those bad people, but they have the same tools that you do. So if we're protecting ourselves, they've got tools to make sure that they can cause harm. So I think it's just really important to realize that it will constantly evolve. You need to take the steps to be proactive and leverage the right technology to protect yourselves.
So I think it's an interesting time, I think from a presentation from last week, we're on the 5th stage of the Industrial Revolution. So I did my A-level on Industrial Revolution, left it because I found it so boring. Who would know that I am living the 5th stage of it? So I think the thing is, don't get scared. Andrew is fantastic, and I love the way that you're so positive about technology and the way that it will be affecting us. If you are, to be honest with you, I've come across a lot of people that do feel slightly overwhelmed about cybersecurity, AI, how it's going to affect the payroll industry, how it may affect their jobs. But just think, get in touch with Rick and Andrew. They'll talk you through it. Moving forward is important for our industry. And as you say, you just need to protect yourself, be prepared going forward. So I have put on the Helios website in the comments. So I think Rick and Andrew are going to be working a little bit harder maybe the next 2 weeks for your launch. So if anybody has any questions, we will be working with Rick and the team during November should you want to know a little bit more. So we'll let you know when we start doing that, Rick. Hey. But if you have any questions for Rick and Andrew, I know Rick always answers the questions, so feel free to contact him on LinkedIn. Again, with Andrew, maybe after the launch, shall we say? Contact Andrew.
Anytime. All right.
That was good. I will say I did use Andrew for a question on AI a few weeks ago, and it was fantastic. So he's one of the most interesting IT people I've come across. So really, really good source of information. No, really good. I really enjoy it. I probably have like a proper geek off when we have these sessions. So it's great. Rick, anything you want to say before we go?
Well, besides taking all of my positivity about Andrew, no, Melanie, thank you for all of this as well. We're super excited, and as you understand, we know this industry. We know how to do business. HR technology background, that's really important for us. And so, any company that's struggling with their vendors, they're looking for a change, they're looking for automation, they're looking for the right AI tools, looking for the right protection. Happy to have a conversation with you guys. Melanie indicated we love to respond. Our Achilles heel here is helping people. We want to make sure that we're creating equitable opportunities for all businesses to be able to expand globally. So feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to have those conversations. But Melanie, thank you as always. And Andrew, great job.
Yeah.
I know I say this to you all the time, but great job.
Right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Melanie.
If you do have any questions, put them in the comments box, and we'll see you again in a few weeks' time. So look forward to seeing everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.